Hello and welcome to my little Ableton outboard synth tutorial. Since I'm currently preparing my new live setup and make it ready, I wanted to test again some small things in this context. For example, the different ways to synchronize external equipment with MIDI or CV, with Ableton CV tools, or with Esxpert Sleeper's silent way. Take a look at the different input modes, but maybe I make another tutorial on this one. Check if the different buffer size settings have an effect on the clocks, and so I just want to test the different possibilities and also see which reset and clock settings on the hardware and software are important to create the best sync between Ableton and my modular synthesizer, or in your case your external equipment. You can use any synthesizer, drum machine or FX unit with MIDI or CV sync possibilities. So I thought that this might also be interesting for some of you, and therefore I recorded a small tutorial, and in the end hopefully we see the differences. Okay, first I'm trying to sync the Westlich Performer to Ableton through my Moto MIDI interface. I'm going to connect the MIDI cable to the interface, and I'm going to go over here and plug the MIDI cable in here as well. Get rid of the CV connections first, and then have a look at the settings. It's important that the performer is set to slave. The start, stop, the reset settings are also very important. You have to check the manual or test around with your equipment what's best. And then the MIDI settings, in this case RX and TX, has to be on. Okay, now we can go back to Ableton and press play. And as we see, the performer starts, stops and resets in sync with Ableton. I decided to use a noise signal. I also have an oscillator signal here. Maybe it's more pleasant for the ears. Yeah, that's a nicer signal, but I think the noise, it's better to measure. So I think we take the noise for this test. The input channels are 27 and 28, and now it's important that I monitor before the audio interface with my analog desk that there is as less latency as possible. Yeah, so here we have a delay of 6. Yeah, this was with a low buffer size. Midi Clock, low buffer, and we have a delay of about 6 milliseconds here. We can zoom in much more, but then it will take much longer, and I think this video will be long enough. So 6 on the first bar. Here we have also about 6 milliseconds of delay before here we also have 5 milliseconds in this case, maybe a bit less. It's not an oscilloscope here, but I think it's good enough. 5 milliseconds in this case. So 6 on the first beat, 5 on the second, 2 on the third, yeah, and that is jitter. 2 to 5 seconds of delay. To 5 milliseconds. That's around about 3 milliseconds of jitter with a low buffer size of 64 in this case. Now we make a new track, rename this to high buffer size. Change the buffer settings to 1024. In this case, record. And now, as we see, we have much longer delay with the higher buffer setting, and that's about 30 milliseconds. You can see it down here, 31. That's about 25 milliseconds more than with the low buffer size. Here it's 31 again. Here it's 28 to 31. 28. And 28 again. That's it. 28 to 32 milliseconds. Yeah, that's also 3 to 4 milliseconds of jitter, like with the low buffer size, but we have a much longer latency here. Yeah. And it's very important to see that the MIDI clock is influenced by the buffer size. So when your project goes bigger and you have to set your buffer settings up, then your MIDI clock will get more unstable. That's important to know. And now we check it with Ableton CV tools. With this clock we send out audio pulse out of the interface, not a MIDI clock, with MIDI, and connect this to the Esxpert performer and see what happens then. Send reset and clock to the dedicated outputs. Oh, sorry, but it's important to mention that there is another version of CV clock. You can download it for free, and this version has the ability to change the start and stop messages. To change the reset message to start or stop. And in the case of my Esxpert performer, I need a stop message to reset the synthesizer. On the other clock out, you only have a start message. Here you can choose between start and stop. Set the clock rate. Also, this is different on any device, so look in the manual or test it. what's best for your device. Also here we have to set the outputs for reset and clock. Then we have to set an input. Monitor mode to off. And then we go over to the performer. We have to check the reset mode and maybe the clock divisor. And pull the MIDI cable out. And put the CV clock and reset signals in. Now when we press play here in Ableton, the performer starts and stops. Now we record the signal. And now we see it's better than the Midi clock with the low buffer size. We only have a delay of around about 5 milliseconds. Six. Okay, here it's 6. Rename it to 6. Then it's the same like here. Here we have about 4 milliseconds. Here we have about 4 milliseconds. And here we have 4 milliseconds. And here we have 2 milliseconds. And here we have 4 milliseconds. And 4 milliseconds. Oh. 2 CV clocks. CV clock 2 to 4 milliseconds with high buffer time. Now we duplicate the track, rename it to low buffer. So it seems we also have a little bit of jitter here with the CV clock, but maybe this is the sequencer. Maybe there is a jitter of 1 millisecond. but it's a bit better than the Midi clock with low buffer. And here we have the high buffer size, so we test it with a low buffer size as well. As we see, it's a bit late. It's 4 milliseconds. And here we have 3 milliseconds. And here we have 3 milliseconds. And here we have 5 milliseconds. No. Here. 4 milliseconds. 4 milliseconds. Two milliseconds. So there's no difference to the high buffer size. We have 2 to 4 milliseconds. Yeah, that's around 1 to 2 milliseconds of jitter. Here we have 4 milliseconds of jitter, and here we also have 4 milliseconds of jitter. So sometimes I have the feeling that the CV clock from Ableton is a bit buggy and unstable. So the last option we have is the Esxpert Sleepers sync plugin. Esxpert Sleepers Silent Wave Sync. In the CV clock we set the output in the plugin. In the Silent Wave Sync we have to set the output here in the track. Set the clock to 48 and the divisor to stop, I think. Yes, it starts and stops in sync. Now we record. It to a new track, external in 2728, record. Now we see it's better than the CV clock. It's a delay of 2 milliseconds. And here we have a delay of maybe 3. 2, 3, yeah, about 3 milliseconds. Here we have also about 1 maybe 2 milliseconds. here is a delay of also 2 milliseconds. And here is a delay of 4 milliseconds. So also there is a little jitter. It's the same like the CD clock. Now we have this 2 to 4 milliseconds delay. To get rid of this, we can set an offset here in silent way. Maybe we try it with 2 milliseconds. Make a new track. And as we see now, it's spot on. There is no delay. It's very good. It's very tight. So maybe we can adjust the offset a little bit more here. Maybe half a millisecond or 1 millisecond more. Then the signal is spot on. But you have to deal with the problem that if you set an offset in a plugin, it needs 4 bars to start. So in some scenarios like a live show or something else, it's not really practical because your external gear will be 4 bars behind the rest of the song. So in my opinion, the Esxpert Sleeper Sync is the best solution. With the Midi Clock, the Midi Clock is really influenced by the buffer size. With a high buffer size you have a very high latency. With a low buffer size it's okay, but there is a little bit of jitter, around 4 milliseconds. With the CB tools you have a very good latency, about 2 to 4 milliseconds, a little jitter of around 1 or 2 milliseconds, but it's not influenced by the buffer setting. Yeah, and with the silent wave sync, in my opinion, it's the best way to sync your external gear, because it's not influenced by the buffer size and you can adjust some settings in the plugin to make it really spot on with the beat. Yeah, and that's it. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and maybe let me know what's your favorite way of syncing your equipment.